No one invited Beatrice to dance that night. While music drifted through the grand hall, glowing beneath golden chandeliers, she sat alone near the wall and watched the couples fill the dance floor. One after another, the young women of Maple Creek County were chosen for a dance. Some smiled with pride. Others passed in front of her, trying to show off their expensive gowns, as if they wanted to remind Beatrice of the place they believed she belonged. And with every new melody, the humiliation became harder to bear. But what hurt her most was not the loneliness of that corner. What wounded her most were the whispers of the women around her. Some said that perhaps no one invited Beatrice because she was not beautiful enough for a place like that. Others claimed that the simple daughter of farm workers would never attract attention at such an important celebration. Beatrice pretended not to hear. She kept her eyes on the dance floor and tried to smile, but inside, her heart tightened more and more. Meanwhile, in the center of the hall, every woman was fighting for the attention of the same man. His name was Andrew Harrington, the richest landowner in the region. Throughout the evening, almost every woman present had invited him to dance, and during each dance, the same thing happened. They spoke about their virtues, tried to impress him, and showered him with exaggerated compliments. Some even hinted that they would make wonderful wives. But Andrew was growing tired of all the pretending, the rehearsed smiles, and the empty words. Then his gaze fell on the woman sitting alone beside the wall. The woman no one had chosen that night. A few minutes later, just as Beatrice decided it was time to leave and escape that humiliation, Andrew crossed the entire hall in her direction. Silence instantly fell over the celebration. Everyone stopped to see what would happen in that unusual moment. And when he extended his hand toward her, no one could imagine that this simple dance would become the beginning of a story powerful enough to change two lives. Beatrice had always believed that some people were born to be seen, while others were born to be forgotten for a lifetime. Since childhood, she had noticed how certain women could enter any room and instantly draw every eye. It seemed as if they carried their own light, one no one could ignore. She, meanwhile, had grown up learning to live simply. From an early age, she worked beside her parents and found happiness in the small joys life offered during the hardest days. She had no expensive dresses. She had no jewelry. And, of course, she did not belong to any important or influential family in Maple Creek County. But there was one thing she possessed, something no one could take from her: sincere kindness and a compassionate heart. Beatrice was known for helping those in need, even when she had little to offer herself. She loved caring for animals with tenderness, speaking with elderly people forgotten by their families, and seeing beauty in places where almost no one bothered to look. Perhaps that was why she loved dancing so much. When the music began, she felt as if all her problems disappeared for a few precious minutes. Andrew Harrington was the complete opposite in many ways. He owned land, cattle, and businesses spread across several towns in the region. Everyone respected him. His fortune inspired admiration in some and suspicious interest in many others around him. Ever since he had become a widower, women had constantly tried to get close to him. But Andrew had learned to recognize the difference between an honest look and an interested one. Most seemed far more concerned with his property than with his heart. That was why, on that evening, he assumed the ball would be just another celebration, the same as countless others he had attended before. But fate had entirely different plans for both of them, plans neither of them could imagine in that moment. Andrew did not yet know that the woman sitting alone near the dance floor would completely change the course of his life. After the unexpected invitation, Beatrice froze for several long seconds, trying to understand what was happening to her. Around her, the entire hall watched the scene in disbelief. The same women who, moments earlier, had been fighting for Andrew's attention now stared in astonishment. Some tried to understand what that highly desired man had seen in the only woman who had spent the whole evening sitting alone. Beatrice felt her face burn with a warmth she had never experienced before. For a moment, she thought about refusing the invitation. Not because she did not want to dance, but because she could not understand the reason for such an unexpected and extraordinary gesture. Still, she placed her hand gently in Andrew's palm and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. The music was slow at that moment. It was an old country melody, classic and nostalgic, one many of the guests remembered from their youth. Andrew smiled politely, expecting this dance to be like all the others he had shared during that long evening. But this dance was different. Completely different. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. During the first minutes, Beatrice did not speak about herself. She did not ask him about his land or the wealth he had accumulated over many years. She did not mention money. She did not try to impress him with anything false. She simply danced with sincerity, carrying a pure and honest joy in her heart. When the melody became livelier, her eyes shone in such a way that Andrew found himself completely captivated by the beauty he saw in her. At one point, Beatrice even smiled when she recognized the melody she had heard as a child while living with her humble parents. "I love this song," Beatrice said softly, continuing to dance to the sound of the music that was so familiar to her heart. "Really?" Andrew asked with genuine curiosity. "My parents used to play it often on an old radio when I was very little." Andrew noticed something extraordinary in that simple answer. For the first time all evening, someone was paying attention to the music, not to him. That awakened his curiosity in a way nothing else had that night. While the other women had spent the entire evening trying to appear perfect, Beatrice seemed to have completely forgotten who the man before her was. She simply enjoyed the moment sincerely, living every second of the music and every movement of her feet. When the song ended, Andrew thanked her for her company. Beatrice answered with the same politeness and honest simplicity. No interested hints, no empty promises, no calculating glances. Only pure gratitude coming straight from her heart. And it was precisely that simplicity that remained in Andrew's thoughts for the rest of that memorable evening in the Golden Hall. When he returned to his table, several women quickly surrounded him again, seeking his attention as always. But now something inside him had changed. For the first time in a long while, he had met someone who seemed to want nothing from him. During a casual conversation with workers from town, he heard someone mention Beatrice's name for the position. They said she was hardworking and honest. They said she put effort into everything she did. They also said she was looking for work to help her family, who needed the money badly. That was enough for Andrew to make a quick decision. A few days later, a messenger arrived at Beatrice's home with a job offer. When she heard the proposal, she froze for several seconds, unable to believe what the messenger had told her. Working at the most important estate in the region seemed far too distant for someone of her humble position. But the opportunity was good, and the pay was generous. Her family needed that money in order to live with dignity. So Beatrice accepted the position and began preparing for a completely new chapter of her life. The following week, Beatrice arrived at Harrington Ranch early in the morning. The place was even more impressive than she had imagined. The fields seemed endless. The stables were enormous. The gardens were always well cared for by numerous workers, and dozens of employees worked every day to keep everything running like a perfectly organized machine. That day, she met Paul Miller, Andrew's trusted manager. He was an experienced man whom everyone respected, known for protecting simple workers from injustice. "So you're Beatrice?" he said with a friendly smile. "Yes, sir," Beatrice answered shyly. "The owner asked me to show you around," Paul said kindly. "I hope I won't be in anyone's way," Beatrice replied with concern. Paul laughed softly to reassure her. Anyone who comes here willing to work is unlikely to be in the way on this ranch, Paul said with confidence. During the following week, Beatrice won the affection of nearly everyone who worked on the large estate. She greeted every worker by name, helped whenever someone needed a hand, and never complained, even about the hardest tasks. She treated the animals as though they were part of the family she had left behind at home. She spoke to the horses while carefully brushing their manes. Every morning, she carried fruit to the ducks at the pond. She talked to the chickens as if she were chatting with old friends. Many workers laughed a little at this unusual behavior, but they also admired her sincere way of seeing the world and respecting every living creature around her. As the days passed, Andrew began to notice something curious about the estate. Whenever he walked past the gardens, he saw people smiling near Beatrice. Whenever he passed the stables or the corridors of the main house, he found workers speaking happily with her. It seemed as though Beatrice spread peace and joy everywhere she went, without doing anything special to achieve it. And without even realizing it, the presence of that humble young woman began to transform the atmosphere of the ranch for the better. What no one suspected was that not everyone was happy about it. Abigail Whitmore watched Beatrice each day with an increasingly dangerous gaze, full of hidden malice. If there was one person who was not pleased by Beatrice's arrival at Harrington Ranch, it was certainly Abigail. To an outside observer, Abigail seemed like the perfect woman in that society. Always well-dressed. Always polite. Always smiling. When she visited the ranch, she made sure to greet the workers in Andrew's presence so she would appear generous. She asked about their health, praised Paul's work, and even brought small gifts for some employees. But all of that disappeared whenever Andrew was not nearby to observe her actions. In those moments, her voice changed completely. Her gaze became frighteningly cold. And above all, her patience vanished. Abigail had been visiting the estate for many months. As the daughter of a wealthy and influential family from Maple Creek County, she had plans. She believed it was only a matter of time before she became Andrew Harrington's wife. After all, in her mind, it was perfectly logical. She had beauty, high social status, and she knew the rules of the world in which powerful landowners moved every day. So when she noticed that Andrew was beginning to pay attention to a simple worker, something dangerous awakened inside her. First came a sharp irritation. Then deep envy. And soon after that, something far worse than any previous feeling was born. Abigail began watching Beatrice constantly. She watched how the workers loved her. She watched carefully how the animals seemed to be drawn to her. She watched how Paul often smiled during their conversations. And most importantly, she watched Andrew so closely that no one noticed her constant surveillance. Andrew showed nothing openly. But there were small details that could not be completely hidden. Sometimes he slowed his steps when passing near the gardens where Beatrice worked. Sometimes he asked simple questions about matters he already knew, only to prolong the conversation with her. Nothing obvious. Nothing that could be pointed to as undeniable proof. But enough to alarm Abigail. One morning, Abigail found Beatrice feeding chickens near the main barn of Harrington Ranch. The young woman held grain in her hands and spoke quietly to the birds as if they were old acquaintances. Paul, watching the scene from a distance, smiled tenderly, understanding her kindness. Abigail found nothing amusing about it. "Do you really talk to chickens?" she asked with a mocking smile, clearly trying to wound her. "Sometimes," Beatrice answered calmly, raising her eyes. "And do they answer you?" Abigail asked maliciously. "Not with words," Beatrice replied honestly. "Of course not," Abigail said, giving a short, false laugh. But there was poison hidden in that laugh. Maybe that's why you love them so much, Abigail continued. Not one of them can talk back to you. Beatrice clearly felt the provocation, but decided not to answer. That refusal to react irritated Abigail even more. She was used to people who argued, who reacted, who lost control when she provoked them. But Beatrice always found a way to remain calm and dignified. That became almost an obsession for Abigail. In the following days, the provocations grew much worse. Abigail criticized the way Beatrice cleaned the main house. She made cruel comments about her simple clothes. She threw cutting remarks about her humble origins and low position. Everything was always subtle and calculated. Always far from Andrew's watchful eyes, so she would not be exposed. But Beatrice continued refusing to answer her attacks, and that made Abigail's desire to break her almost obsessive. Abigail wanted to see her lose control. She wanted to see her cry. She wanted to see her make a serious mistake. Because deep down, she had already understood a truth she refused to fully accept. The problem was not Beatrice. The problem was that Andrew admired exactly what Abigail could never truly imitate: genuine and sincere kindness. One hot afternoon, while walking along the main veranda of the house, Abigail noticed Andrew watching something in silence. His gaze was fixed on Beatrice, who was helping an elderly worker carry a heavy basket. Andrew said nothing at that moment, but he smiled faintly, in a way that revealed his true feelings. It was a quick smile, almost invisible to most people watching. But Abigail saw it. And in that very instant, she understood that she was losing her place in Andrew's heart. For the first time, she felt fear. Not fear of losing some competition, but fear of losing something she considered rightfully hers. When she returned home that evening, she spent hours thinking about the scene she had witnessed. And the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that she had to act quickly. It was no longer enough to provoke Beatrice in passing. It was no longer enough to spread cruel rumors. She needed to do something that would place Beatrice in a hopeless situation. Something that would completely destroy the image everyone had formed of her. And above all, the image Andrew was beginning to create in his heart. A few days later, while walking through the corridors of the main house, Abigail found the opportunity she had been impatiently waiting for. And she decided that the moment had finally come to remove that girl from her path in a way that would leave no road back. She did not suspect that her own malicious trap would eventually change everything in a way she could never foresee or control. That week, the main house of the ranch was supposed to receive several important guests from other regions. Because of that, all the workers were busy to the limit. They prepared the halls, arranged the furniture, and made sure every corner was spotless. Beatrice was given an important task: to clean the grand main hall, one of the most beautiful rooms on the estate. The high ceiling was supported by beams of fine wood. Huge windows allowed the morning light to pour in, filling the entire space. Crystal chandeliers cast small golden reflections over the polished floor, which shone naturally in the brightness. Beatrice spent hours working in that special room. First, she carefully dusted the elegant furniture. Then she patiently washed every window until each one was flawless. Finally, she began scrubbing the floor with dedication. The work was long and exhausting, but Beatrice did everything with the same effort and devotion as always. When she finished, she stepped back to examine the result of many hours of hard work. The hall looked completely new. Bright. Perfect. At that moment, she heard the sound of heels approaching. She did not need to look to know who it was. That sound was unmistakable. Abigail was coming with bad intentions. "I see you're still pretending to be the lady of the house," Abigail said with contempt. "I'm only finishing my work," Beatrice answered. "Your work?" Abigail repeated, as though the words were amusing. She walked slowly around the hall, inspecting everything. Her gaze slid over the glittering chandeliers, the curtains, the furniture, and then returned to Beatrice with open disdain. "It must be exhausting to spend all day cleaning things that will never belong to you," Abigail said cruelly. The provocation hung in the air, but Beatrice only lowered the cloth back into the bucket of dirty water. That irritated Abigail even more. Always the same calm. Always the same silence. Always that unbearable serenity. That serenity made Beatrice seem almost untouchable. Then Abigail made her decision. As she passed beside the bucket, she moved her foot discreetly. It was a quick, calculated, carefully planned motion. Just enough to knock it over onto the floor Beatrice had just cleaned. The dark water spread across the spotless surface. The bucket rolled across the hall, making a dull clatter that echoed against the walls. For a moment, Beatrice froze, trying to understand what had happened. Hours of work vanished before her eyes. But the worst was still ahead. "What a disaster," Abigail said, pretending to be concerned. She looked at the dirt spread across the hall and shook her head with completely false pity. "Some people truly are born to fail," Abigail added, hiding her cruelty beneath a mask of sympathy. Beatrice took a deep breath. She did not want to argue with Abigail. She did not want to create problems. She bent down to pick up the bucket from the floor, but Abigail continued her verbal attacks. "Maybe that's why no one chose you at the ball. Maybe that's why you remain nothing more than a servant. Maybe some people are simply never meant to rise." The words struck Beatrice like stones. Not only because they were cruel, but because Abigail knew exactly where it would hurt the most. Still, Beatrice remained silent and continued her work. It was at that exact moment that a voice sounded behind them. "Are you finished?" Both women turned at the same time to face that decisive moment. Andrew stood in the doorway of the hall, watching. His face showed neither anger nor surprise, but his eyes had seen absolutely everything. Every movement Abigail had made. Every cruel word. Everything. For one full second, Abigail felt as if everything inside her had collapsed. No one said a word. The silence was absolute. Then she did the only thing she could think of to save herself. She lifted one hand to her forehead, staggered a few steps as if she were dizzy, and theatrically pretended to faint, falling onto the rug. The silence in the room became even heavier. Andrew continued watching that cheap performance. He did not move a single muscle. He did not rush to help her with false concern. He did not pretend to be alarmed. He showed no trace of fake worry. Then he turned toward the hallway. "Paul," Andrew called loudly, so everyone could hear his order. The manager appeared almost instantly. "Yes, sir," Paul answered, listening carefully. Andrew pointed at Abigail without even looking at her. "Take her outside," he ordered coldly. Paul immediately understood what Andrew meant, and he had to make a great effort to hide a smile. "Yes, sir," Paul replied without objection. He quickly walked over to the supposedly unconscious woman, lifted her easily into his arms, and headed toward the exit of the house without the slightest hesitation. Abigail continued pretending to be unconscious until they were close to the carriage waiting outside. Accustomed to the privileges of her position, Abigail always arrived at neighboring estates in her own carriage. For her, it was more than a means of transportation. It was a way to remind everyone who she believed herself to be. Ironically, that day, the very same carriage that had so often symbolized prestige and importance was now carrying her away under the weight of humiliation. From that day on, that memory would forever remain tied to the greatest shame of her life. But when Paul opened the carriage door, Abigail completely lost the patience and control she had been pretending to have. She suddenly opened her eyes and forcefully pushed his hand away, speaking through clenched teeth with hatred. "Get your hands off me immediately," Abigail ordered. Paul remained perfectly calm. "How fortunate that you recovered so quickly," Paul replied with sarcasm. "How dare Andrew treat me this way?" "Do you truly want to know the truth?" Paul asked. Abigail crossed her arms, waiting for his answer. Paul half closed the carriage door, rested one hand on the wood, and began to speak. "You think you lost the chance to marry a rich man," Paul began. "But what you lost was much greater. You lost something far harder to earn." Abigail stared at him with contained rage. "Yes, my employer has more than enough money," Paul continued. "He has land as well. He has cattle too. But his respect is not something he gives to everyone. And today, you threw it away with your own hands." Paul looked at her seriously. "I think it would be better if you did not return here. Some doors, once they are truly closed, never open again." As the carriage disappeared down the dirt road, Abigail finally understood the full scale of the disaster. Inside the main house, Andrew walked toward the hall with firm, determined steps. Not to check the dirt on the floor. Not to complain about the ruined work. But to speak with the woman who, without even realizing it, already held an increasingly important place in his heart. After Abigail's carriage vanished down the dusty road, silence settled everywhere again. Inside the main house, Beatrice was still kneeling in the hall, gathering the spilled water. Despite everything that had happened, she showed no outrage, no resentment, and no desire for revenge. She simply returned to her work, as she always had, as if nothing had happened with Abigail. When she lifted her eyes, she saw Andrew standing only a few steps away from her.